Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at the beautiful game through a completely different lens. We aren't just going to talk about basic formations or coaching styles. We're actually looking at the tactical evolution of soccer like it's a biological ecosystem. Think of it as tactical Darwinism, right? It's a world where the rules of nature apply out there on the pitch, and only the most adaptable strategies survive. And the absolute ultimate survivor in this ecosystem is a concept you hear all the time: pressing. But, pressing isn't just some modern buzzword cooked up by a contemporary manager. It's a proactive defense that actively limits an opponent's spatial options through directed resistance immediately after losing the ball. In fact, it is literally the innate diagnosis and confrontational DNA of modern soccer. It represents this massive evolutionary shift in the game, taking defensive play from something merely reactive and turning it into something fiercely proactive. So, that brings us to a really fascinating question. If you look back at the early origins of soccer, it was chaotic. It was this disjointed game defined by vast open distances between attackers and defenders. Honestly, a completely different beast. So how exactly did that primitive style evolve into the highly synchronized, high-speed hunt we see under the stadium lights today? Well, it's a problem that required decades of genetic-like mutations to solve. Let's move to and see how this builds, tracking these mutations chronologically. We'll start in the 1920s with Chapman's WM system, move on to the brilliant Hungarian innovations of the 1950s, hit the rebellious early mutations in the 60s, the total football revolution of the 70s, and finally land on the highly institutionalized pressing of the 1980s. Section 1. The DNA of soccer and finding tactical balance. To truly grasp this evolution, we have to look at the early days of the sport and the desperate search for technical balance. Formations back then were incredibly imbalanced. We're talking extreme setups, sometimes featuring 9 forwards and just a single defender. It created this totally exhausting dynamic where attacking players gave everything going forward but had zero energy or even organization to defend once they lost the ball. The legendary Johan Cruyff perfectly captured the essence of this tactical evolution when he said, "In fact, soccer is an easy game. The most complicated part of it is to play it in a simple manner." Finding that simplicity, figuring out a balanced, efficient way for 11 individual players to act as a single organism, has been the driving force behind the entire evolution of pressing. The first major mutation to find this balance actually happened back in the 1920s with Herbert Chapman at Arsenal. He introduced the WM system, moving away from those totally top-heavy formations. By deliberately withdrawing forwards back into the midfield, he tried to close those vast spatial gaps on the pitch. It was really the very first time we saw a coordinated effort to balance offense and defense, laying the foundational groundwork for modern team synergy. That brings us to Section 2, Sparks of Early Pressing. Decades later, that foundation gave rise to what we can call the early sparks. For this, we have to travel to the 1950s and look at the legendary Hungarian Aranycsapat, or the Golden Team, managed by Gustav Sebes. It was here, within their modified system, that the world witnessed the very first isolated sparks of organized, proactive pressing. Now, what's really interesting here is how the Hungarian team fundamentally altered the use of space. Notice the overlapping of players in the midfield. When they lost the ball, instead of retreating deep into their own half like everyone else, they started shifting defensively toward the ball to actively contract the playing space. They were purposefully shrinking the ecosystem that the opponent had to survive in. This active playing area contracted significantly through this extension of the defense. Ultimately, this meant a sudden, sharp increase in movement intensity right after losing possession. The players were working harder, faster, and smarter to completely suffocate the opponent's options. This seemingly small mutation fundamentally shifted the entire tempo of international soccer. The structural secret behind this? Their pentagonal alignment in the midfield. This flexible shape acted like a tactical pivot, allowing seamless, almost instant switching between attack and defense. It kept the team super connected and compact, acting as a direct structural precursor to the globalized pressing systems we see dominating the sport today. So, looking at this, we can start to map out a clear hierarchy of soccer's evolution. It began at the base with simple mutual help among players. That mutated into universalism and total football. That, in turn, evolved into the positive response of active defense. And finally, at the absolute peak of this evolutionary chain, we find pressing and its early forms. This developmental hierarchy perfectly shows how each generation of coaches layered their innovations directly onto the previous one's DNA. Just like biological traits being passed down and refined over generations, organized pressing wasn't just invented overnight. No way. It was inherited, refined, and aggressively escalated up this tactical pyramid. By the 1960s, this evolution split into two distinct geographic branches. Over in Europe, we have Viktor Maslov at Dynamo Kyiv, pioneering a really sophisticated 4-4-2 zonal defense that prioritized spatial blocking. Contrast that with Osvaldo Zubeldia's approach with Estudiantes in South America. Zubeldia's mutation relied on incredibly aggressive, offside trap-heavy man-to-man pressure. Literally two vastly different environments producing two distinct, highly aggressive tactical species. But the evolutionary leap that truly changed everything arrived in the 1970s. Section 3, the total football revolution. Enter Rinus Michels, Ajax, and the Dutch school of total football. This wasn't just a minor tweak to the system. This was an absolute tactical revolution that totally rewrote the genetic code of how soccer could be played. You can actually track this genetic lineage straight from Maslov's early pressing at Dynamo Kyiv in the 60s right directly into Rinus Michels and Ajax in the 70s. The Dutch absorbed this concept of collective defense and completely elevated it, giving birth to what we now classify as authentic pressing. Total football demanded two massive physiological adaptations from its players: seamless vertical position exchanges and absolutely relentless physical conditioning. Michels famously termed this aggressive style opponent hunting. Players physically totalized the game by constantly rotating positions. This meant an attacker would instantly become a defender the second the ball was lost, relentlessly swarming the opponent. The final stage in our evolutionary journey brings us to the late 1980s and early 1990s. Section 4, Perfecting Modern Pressing. This is the moment when the tactic stops being just a radical experiment by a few visionary coaches and finally becomes fully institutionalized as the absolute standard of top-tier professional soccer. Two absolute giants dominated this era, bringing slightly different mutations to the table. On one side, you've got Arrigo Sacchi at AC Milan, who focused heavily on ultra-compact zonal defense and a highly synchronized offside trap to just strangle the opposition's space. On the other side, Johan Cruyff at Barcelona saw pressing a bit differently. He used it primarily as a tool to fuel total, unrelenting offense. And this brilliantly illustrates Cruyff's mindset. He described his team by saying, "Hunting the ball seemed like a pack of hungry wolves." He viewed pressing not just as some defensive chore, but as a synchronized biological attack. The whole goal was to regain possession instantly, so they could get right back to dominating the ball and scoring. Cruyff achieved this with his 1992 Barcelona Dream Team by using a really unique 3-4-3 diamond alignment. This ensured the maximum number of players were already perfectly positioned to violently contest the ball the exact moment it was lost high up the pitch. This brilliant adaptation actually saved his players energy because, well, they didn't have to sprint 50 yards back to their own goal just to defend. Which brings us right up to the modern era, where pressing has essentially become the dominant tactical virus of the 21st century. Successors like Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, and Marcelo Bielsa have taken the DNA of Sacchi and Cruyff, mutating it even further. They've spread this high-octane, intense tactical virus to literally every major league across the globe. So, the crucial point is this. When you turn on the TV this weekend and watch a team seamlessly swarm their opponents in a high-tempo frenzy, remember that you aren't just watching some passing modern trend. You are witnessing the apex predator of soccer's evolutionary tree, a strategy forged through a century of tactical Darwinism. But, as we know from biology, evolution never actually stops. If modern global pressing is currently soccer's ultimate mutation, it begs the question, what comes next? How will the DNA of the game and the creative minds of future coaches evolve to break this apex predator in the next era of soccer? It's a fascinating thought to leave you with. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the pitch to spot the next mutation.